Okay, hello everyone. Welcome to the continuation of our Winter's Mon. For those of you who have not been with us before, our Winter's Mon is all about food. So in the morning we have classes about the sixth parak of Masachet Brachot, which talks about blessings that you make over food that you're enjoying as you're consuming it, and other kinds of blessings that you would make. And in the afternoons we have classes on Jewish thought and Halakhah relating to food. And in the evenings we've been exploring. Last week we had people who actually make food from the source. So we had a Torah teacher who's also a beekeeper and a Torah teacher who also raises heritage poultry. And what Drisha's very own Michael Fraud spoke about his time growing plants and connected that into as a produce farmer and connected that into Torah as well. We also had a Chait. So that was last week. And this week we've taken a turn from there to how food gets to the people who need it the most, or how food doesn't get to the people who need it the most, and how Judaism thinks about food distribution. And how there is plenty of food to go around this country, but it doesn't actually get around. So last night we had representatives from Mazon talking about hunger and their work on a kind of policy level, which is very important, as they mentioned, because they estimate that this year there will be an 8 billion meal shortfall beyond what some of the charities that we'll hear from tonight, and there are many, many partner organizations around the globe, are able to provide. And so that's where the government comes in. But in addition to the government, we also have the private sector, and the Jewish community's private sector as relates to food is really doing amazing, admirable work, but also doing it in quite different ways. So tonight, we have the opportunity to hear from representatives from 3 different organizations. We're going to be in conversation with each other about their practices in food distribution. So let me just introduce our panelists. We have Dr. Victoria Haas. She's the clinical director at the ARC in Chicago, where she oversees all client services. And in this role, which she's been in for the past 12 years, her oversight includes social services in Chicago and also in the suburbs, a transitional housing program, an intensive day program, graduate student training program in psychology and social work. Dr. Haas earned her PhD in clinical psychology from Northwestern University, completed her psychology residency at the University of Illinois Student Counseling Center, and she received her master's from the University of Chicago School of Social Service Administration, her bachelor's from the University of Wisconsin in Madison. Before she joined the ARC, she served as the director of psychological services for College Living Experience, a program that supported college students with learning disabilities and behavioral issues to be academically and socially successful in college. Earlier in her career, Dr. Haas was a social worker at the Lieberman Geriatric Health Center and served as a consultant for the Council for Jewish Elderly, CJE Senior Life, and also maintained a private practice. She and her husband live in Wilmette. They're the parents of 2 married sons, and they just had their first grandchild. Jessica Chait is the managing director of food programs at Met Council in New York. She's responsible for the Kosher Food Network, the largest free kosher food distribution system in the world, and for bringing greater visibility to food insecurity within the Jewish community. Prior to joining Met Council, Jessica worked for UJA Federation in New York in roles of increasing responsibility, culminating as chief of staff responsible for strategic initiatives, including UJA's year-long centennial celebration. Jessica is passionate about helping the vulnerable, and prior to her move to New York, she worked for nonprofits in Poland and Zambia. She grew up in San Antonio, Texas, holds a BA in psychology from the University of Texas, and an MPA from NYU. Alexander Rappoport is also here with us from Masbia. Masbia is a soup kitchen in Queens and Borough Park and other places, but they do it in a very unique way. It's not like any other soup kitchen you've ever seen, and we're so grateful to have you joining us here as well tonight. So we're going to have something of like a moderated conversation, moderated by me. I'm Rabbanit Leah Sarna. I'm Drisha's Associate Director of Education. And as I mentioned on the Monday night when I was teaching, I come to this with 4 years of experience as a hunger and homelessness activist in New Haven when I was an undergraduate, before I kind of shifted over to learning Torah full-time, teaching Torah full-time. But there we were also involved in food redistribution and activities like that. So this is a program, tonight's program is very near and dear to my heart, with hopefully addressing lots of questions that have been on my mind for a very long time. So with that, we will begin. So I wanted to first start out with giving people just a few minutes to introduce their organization's approach to food distribution in particular. So maybe we'll start with Dr. Haas, if that's okay.
Hi, the ARC is a social service agency in Chicago's West Rogers Park community, which is the sort of center of Orthodox life in Chicago, as well as in Northbrook, Illinois, which is a northwest suburb. We have a satellite office there, and there are food pantries at each of those offices. We have about a $7.5 million budget. We're an agency that has a food pantry, yes, but also intensive case management, a medical clinic, a dental clinic, a pharmacy, an intensive day program, which is like a partial hospitalization program for chronically mentally ill. We have a homeless shelter for 22 individuals. And a training program in psychology and social work as well. And our food pantry, is very popular and usually what the ARC is known for, but we do have wraparound services. So we're able to sort of leverage, and I'll talk about that later, the food pantry for our clients. For our food pantry, we spend about $38,000 a month on food. And additionally, almost $13,000 a month on produce vouchers. We don't have a large enough food pantry, so there are markets. There's a produce market nearby, and we give vouchers for people to go and buy fresh produce. And then we also, since COVID began in March, are also giving dual gift cards based on family size. For a family of 1 to 3, it's a $25 gift card. And that's to find hard to find items, especially at the beginning of the pandemic. Our food pantry also has hygiene products, toiletries, and paper products, which, as you know, SNAP does not cover. So we have those as well. We also have about 2,500 clients a month using our food pantries. So I know that pales with Met Council, where your numbers are so huge, but Chicago is a much smaller Jewish community, which brings up other issues, which we'll talk about later as well.
Well, Jessica, since we just mentioned Met Council, let's hop over to you.
Sure, thank you. Good evening, everyone, and it's really, really nice to see you all and be with you and my colleagues as well. So Met Council is a health and human service organization that was founded over 40 years ago to respond really to the unique needs of the Jewish community. As I'm sure many of you have heard people say, oh, there are poor Jews. We don't know of these people. We don't believe of this need. And so Met Council was really founded to bring a voice for those people and for the community, and for particularly our government funders to really be prepared to divert resources or to supply resources to those communities. Met Council does many things, including provides affordable housing. We have a family violence program. We help Holocaust survivors go into people's homes and help with repairs, all things that people who are struggling to make ends meet might need assistance with. As well as, of course, SNAP and benefits access. Our largest program, though, is our emergency food program, which in effect operates as a food bank. So for those who are in New York, but really every city has a Feeding America site. New York City actually has 2, Food Bank for New York City and City Harvest. And Met Council, in effect, operates as a kosher food bank, so a third food bank for New York City. We currently have 2 warehouses. We bring in food in bulk. We then receive both donated food as well as purchased food, and then distribute that to a network of pantries across New York City. Typically, if this weren't a COVID year, we would say we typically support 40 pantries a month, those with exclusively kosher food, though all of the pantries are open for anybody who needs. So all New Yorkers are encouraged to come and welcome, though they are in predominantly kosher requiring neighborhoods. But since the pandemic, and we'll talk more about this, but we have, really dramatically scaled our operation and frankly, over the last 9 months have served over 350 different nonprofits throughout the city, Masbia and others included. So we're very proud of our ability to respond in this way. We also run a number of our own pantries and are using innovative services to reach more people, but we can talk more about that later.
All right, over to you, Rabbi.
Hello.
Hello.
Okay. My name is Alexander Rappoport. I'm the director of the Masbia Soup Kitchen Network. Masbia currently has 3 locations, 2 of them in Brooklyn, 1 in Queens. Our basic idea was just a sharing food idea where people would do that maybe 30, 40 years ago. You would invite a person to your home, to your Shabbos meal, to your dinner. Things like that became less and less of like a realistic option. And a bunch of friends came together and said, we're going to make a place where you can make sure that no one in the neighborhood goes to sleep hungry, and there's going to be a place for dinner every night. And that slowly grew into 2 things where we do both dinner every day and then pantry every day, where you would give groceries. Slowly went from one like grassroots neighborhood thing to a little bit of a network where there's a few such locations. Donors came forward and said, why not replicate it in our neighborhood? And then slowly we added hours. You can imagine like the first day we only had 8 people show up, and then there were hundreds of people every day at all the locations. And we slowly turned into being a food resource in many ways, where there's 2 main ideas, where there's ready-to-eat food for people who are kind of in a situation where they cannot cook for themselves, like more homeless or seniors and that sort of a situation. And then there is for that mother in need to bring home to her family, that type of a thing, where they come and get groceries for the family for a week and take that food and not eat it in our place, but take it home and cook at home with it. What happened is that we were able to scale up during COVID, and we went from doing, let's say, 2 to 3 tractor trailers of food a week to about 15 tractor trailer loads of food a week between the 3 locations. And at the point we are now open 5 days, 24 hours straight every week. So kind of like we scaled like between 500 and 700% kind of what we do just in those 9 months since COVID.
Thank you all. I wanted to talk about there's different philosophies of food distribution. On Monday night, one of the things that we talked about was dignity as maybe like a guiding principle in some of that Halakhah around scarcity. And I'm wondering, what are the values that your organization brings to your food distribution? Are there programs that you realized we tried this thing and it actually wasn't according to our values, so we shifted course, or we tried an experiment and we realized it didn't match up with our vision for how food distribution should kind of optimally be accomplished? And so that was kind of part 1. And then part 2 is, do you feel like those guiding values are particularly Jewish, or do you feel like we're just best in field, and best in field is lives out Jewish values as well? Meaning, so are there differences between what you do and other people do that could be accounted for by the particularly Jewish nature of what you do? And maybe we'll start with Met Council on this one.
Sure. So one of the things that I think is both really innovative, but really is embedded in our values is the issue of dignity, and I think you mentioned it, and I'm sure the other groups will mention it as well. And so there are a number of ways historically the emergency food system has really thought about choice as a way of ensuring dignity, that no one should have to get a bag of food, items for their home, for themselves, that don't speak to their dietary or even just preferred tastes. And so obviously we have that issue frequently around kashrut, and what's kosher to me may not be kosher to you, and making sure that our food is acceptable to everyone. And we have worked really hard over the last number of years to make sure that that's possible. New York City obviously has a lot of diversity in terms of kosher certifications and standards. But even beyond koshers, that we always say there are people who always got a bag of rice and they couldn't eat rice, and there are people, or gluten products, or things that just were challenging for them because they were going home with something that was intended to have them feel good and have them be able to feed themselves and their families, only to open it and find out that it didn't actually accomplish that. And so choice, I think, is across the board. Everywhere in the country is the preferred approach. Obviously, or not obviously, but COVID did for a while actually make that very challenging because you prefer a shopping experience, and then that meant exposure and et cetera, et cetera. But one of the other ways that we have thought a lot about dignity is about access, and that if a pantry is open from 9 to 11 or 1 to 3 or even 6 to 8 p.m. at night, if you work during that time or you have childcare at that time, that's not suitable for you. And so Met Council has been hard at work at a digital system. It's essentially a fresh direct for pantries, which allow people to place their order online. So our inventory at participating pantries is all available online, and they can make and ultimately shop and make the choices that are right for them and for themselves and their families. This is a great, offering that we hope eventually we've been using it for a number of years, but it continues to evolve. And we currently have 8 participating pantries using the system. And our hope is that we will continue to improve this and make it increasingly available. New York City also has a plentiful system, which is about appointments. I know Masbia uses that, which really also hopefully guarantees that people don't have to wait online, just as our experience allows as well. In terms of the question, is that unique to the Jewish community? I think, in effect, it is. There are very few other pantries that are using this. There is a non-Jewish pantry that uses it in New York City called New York Common Pantry. I think what is sort of the Jewish piece of this is that UJA Federation of New York, a broad, an organization that represents ideally the broad nature of Jewish life in New York City, really saw this as a need and rallied their donors and the community around this. And so really emphasizing the role of dignity and holding that up as a value of a Jewish value and caring for the poor has really stepped up to fund this. So the product itself isn't, but I think the motivation behind it and certainly the support behind it is, in my experience, something that as a Jewish community we should be incredibly proud of and reflects our commitment and values.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for telling us about that. Rabbi Rappoport, you spoke before about the kind of values that motivated you to found Masbia. Are those same values or different ones kind of at work in how Masbia even functions on a day-to-day? And those same questions of how and in what ways are those values particularly Jewish and things like that.
Okay, so for the sake of this having a Zman feel and a sheer feel, so let me give it let's throw some stuff out there. So in Shulchan Aruch, in Tzedakah, and then Halakhah Tzedakah, there is a concept of Kol Chaylev Lashem. If you do charity, you should give from the best. It's a very complicated thing to do, although the Shulchan Aruch says to give the poor from the best. So you should give steaks and wines to the poor, but then how do you leverage and serve more versus giving a few people something very special? And that's something we struggle with. So I remember sending out fundraising emails with a lavish Purim meal or a very beautiful Shabbos meal and asking for sponsorships that are 3 or 4 times the weekday meal and having people struggle with it. What does that mean? So are you going to give a hungry person a meal on Purim that's going to have salmon fish and some beef and some halaptzes and some kreplach and some whatever on the expense of a weekday meal that you're struggling to to fulfill. So what is the Torah approach? I'm still struggling with it. It's something that is always a struggle. And guess what? The problem even more is, as a grassroots charity, there's always more appetite for donors to sponsor that fancy one-day-a-year meal than the hot soup for a cold Tuesday in February, right? So it's also like so that's a lot of what we struggle. I would also say that generally speaking, let's try to go all out with this. So we know tikkun olam, right? So let's take the opposite theory and say that the whole concept of tikkun olam is like a very snobby, I will fix you theory. Like I have the idea of how you in Africa should run your town, and I'm going to come with all the money that I got in America and fix your place. So let's say, let's take that problem with the tikkun olam and think of, is food a tool? Is food a anchor? Should we use food as a way to get people to do something else for you? Or should food be unconditional? Should it be like, so the approach we have is we serve food only. You need any other help? You need help for your drug abuse, for your alcoholism, for your homelessness, there's a flyer for you at the table in the corner. We will treat you with dignity, unconditional. We have no social engineering or fixing. We have like almost like a unconditional sharing, like unconditional love. It's unconditional sharing. There are people who have and want to share with a neighbor that doesn't have. No agenda with them, no nothing. And I'll say something, and when you come to that level of purity, I'll use one story that happened. So we had a mashgiach that worked for us. He was for Pesach, for Passover, he was in Arizona. He sends me a WhatsApp like late, didn't work for us anymore. He says, I have to share with you this story that just happened to me. I'm in a cab here in Arizona, going back from where I spent Pesach, going back going to the airport. And you just mess with him, you start a schmooze, and, we brag about life and stuff. And the guy says, you're from Brooklyn? I used to live in Brooklyn. I was a crackhead in Brooklyn, and whatever. But then one place turned my life around. Now I have a family here, and I'm in Arizona. She said, what do you mean? Well, what happened to you in Brooklyn? He says, there's this place on Coney Island Avenue that I used to walk in. They wanted nothing from me. They gave me just dignity. They gave me a meal, a place to eat. They didn't want me to change my life. They just saw me as what I am. I deserve that half hour of being served by a waiter / volunteer, but kind of being served. After multiple times visiting there, they wanted nothing. If they just treated me like a human being, it snapped on me, it switched something on me, and I turned my entire life around. So to me, that's kind of like, even without this story, there's still something in unconditional sharing and no agenda-driven sharing. But even no agenda-driven sharing has something very pure in it that could help people at the end. So again, these are just two ideas about like social engineering versus unconditional sharing, and then the idea of what does it mean kol chaylev l'Hashem when you want to do a mitzvah and you go all out, and like we did, we beautified our places. The People magazine had us as the restaurant without a cash register, right? So kind of like what? How do we deal with? From a Jewish perspective, from a Torah perspective, do we make these lavish Purim meals, or even a Passover Seder that we need to pay triple rate for a mashgiach to come, you know what I mean, like that sort of thing, versus a regular everyday meal, which is so much easier to do, and you could make so many more of that. So these are two open-ended ideas that if you want to talk about Jewishness or Torah perspective, this is something.
Fantastic. Thank you. And now I'm excited to hear Dr. Haas, do tell us about the ARC's philosophy before you then respond to Rabbi Rappoport, because I think the ARC takes a very different approach to the we don't ask anything of you. We don't go find a flyer on the side of the table. That is not what I know about the ARC. And so I'm excited and interested to hear your response also, but you kind of give everyone, most of our listeners don't know all the things I know about.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, the ARC has wraparound services. All of our services are free as well. We take no government funds. We're not eligible for any government funds because we are only serving the Jewish community, though we don't turn anyone away for food. And we do have a client choice pantry. We do have the client has the capacity to, email their orders to their assigned case manager. But what we found is that no one considers themselves as needing food or hungry among our clients. They think that I might need money for this or for that, but I'm not hungry. Thank goodness we're not hungry. We're not that bad off. We don't need food. So what we found is that we needed to reframe the, use of the pantry as a cost-saving measure, because it was too shaming for people to say that they needed food, that they felt that was one area where they felt that it was just too undignified for them. Now, of course, remember, the Chicago community is more insular. It's smaller, and therefore people will know what other people are doing, what other people might have, where other people go to school, where other people daven. So it's hard to be as discreet. And that was probably our greatest challenge, is for getting people to actually use the pantry and see that as an overall line item in their budget. And that's been working a lot better for people. So we ask people to come at least, 9 months out of 12. Our orders are large, and people come for and shop for the month. If they don't have a link card, then they can come more often. But most of our clients do also have a link card. So that's helpful as well.
Okay, so I'm hopeful that maybe people have kind of responses or thoughts about some of the differences between the three different organizations' approaches that we've just heard about. So maybe Dr. Haas, do you want to maybe start on that?
Yeah, well, one thing is that because of COVID, what we have found is that more people are using the pantry, not only because they have greater need, but because our distribution procedure is more discreet. And we have found that perhaps people are using it because all they're doing now is driving up and the food is put in their trunk, where before they had to actually walk into the pantry, stand in a line, and for many people, it was uncomfortable. And we're also doing a great many more deliveries. And we're having volunteers and staff deliver to clients who cannot come out, are more homebound. We also don't want people taking the buses, so we're paying for Ubers and Lyfts and taxis, so people don't have to schlep with their groceries, on public transportation. So all of that has resulted in things being a little more discreet, and we're finding that people are more comfortable. So even as when things loosen up with COVID, there are, even though it's more cumbersome for us, for the pantry staff to be ready with an order when somebody pulls up, we're finding that it's creating a more dignified and comfortable way for people to get their food.
Thank you. Jessica, do you have any thoughts about maybe what accounts for some of the differences between Met Council's work and what what Dr. Haas described or Rabbi Rappoport described?
Yeah, I mean, in all of our models, there are connections, like the Masbia model. Met Council is there and serves everyone. We could not do our work. We could not operate as we do if we did not take government support. And so therefore we are open to everyone. We do have since the start of COVID, have launched a home delivery program for over 2,000 Holocaust survivors living in New York City, primarily in Brooklyn, although some in Queens and Manhattan. And that's, something where we do segregate and say, okay, this is with private funds, we're going to issue this program and offer this. It's obviously something we would love to be able to offer to the entirety. I mean, we got so many calls, particularly in March and April, for requests for home delivery. Luckily, here in New York, the city really stepped up with a program. It had its own challenges, of course, but it was at least an option for a lot of people. Though currently our program for Holocaust survivors is the only home delivery of kosher grocery items that is available. But again, we really do pride ourselves on being open and available to everyone, but also deal with just the realities of kosher food is expensive. How do you give that out appropriately? How do you convey to funders that these are our values, that yes, we're going to buy kosher chicken, and yes, it may go to people who don't need kosher chicken, and how does that work, and what does that mean, and why is that just the way it's going to be? And thankfully, we've been able to really make that case effectively. But I also, going back to access and dignity, the digital pantry system we think is a great innovation, but it really shifts, Dr. Haas referenced this, it shifts the burden of the work from the client to the organization. The digital pantry program is not only expensive for us to run in the technology, it's expensive for us. We are essentially packing the way Peapod or Fresh Direct is packing. And at the beginning of COVID, we had a great number of volunteers who came out to help. Actually, at our Greenpoint location, we had over 2,000 volunteers safely working over the course of a 4-month period. It was really incredible. But out of our main warehouse in East Flatbush, Canarsie, it's a lot harder to recruit volunteers. We have a lot more activity there, so to safely use volunteers is a bit challenging. And it makes for an expensive model to really implement. And again, I think there's a real case to be made for funders about why this is important and valuable. But it's certainly one of the challenges that we confront regularly. I do want to just put a plug in. We have a new mobile pantry, which is essentially a pantry on wheels that is designated to work primarily in Brooklyn right now. And we're very excited about it. And our thinking really is the idea that not only is running a pantry, as anybody on this call will tell you, like a lot of work and not very glamorous, despite the great promotional materials we all make. But many, particularly in New York, real estate is expensive, keeping a space is expensive, finding school, we've tried to partner with synagogues or schools, and everybody is clamoring for space. And the thinking is that having a vehicle that really can get to communities and get to people who need it is a great way to flip or deal with the real estate constraints. And so we're very excited about this. And certainly we are looking for partners in what is called the Vital Brooklyn Corridor. So basically from Canarsie through Crown Heights, and are very excited to be able to deploy this to people who need it. So I don't know if that exactly answers the question, but I think it maybe gives a bigger picture of some of the things we think about and how we work.
Great. That was so interesting. Thank you. Rabbi Rappoport, I'm wondering whether you can specifically speak to, you told us a story about a non-Jewish person who had come in to Masbia, and yet when you look at some of those halakhic texts about tzedakah and who to be giving to, it seems rather clear that Halakhah would have us prioritizing giving to Jews in this way. Maybe you read them differently, and you'll tell me. And so I wonder how you think about that and what accounts for that difference between your work and for example, what the ARC does.
Okay, so the Halakhah does have a hierarchy in the world. I mean, I'm pretty sure the Halakhah even has a hierarchy of how to give out COVID vaccines. You know what I mean? Like there is, and it could be that a Cohen is supposed to get before a Levi COVID vaccine. It could be true. I didn't study it from that angle. So Halakhah does have a hierarchy world, but I think the only place they don't have a hierarchy is when it comes to food. Food charity is, I think the line is, en botkin lemazonot. You don't do any research on how to distribute food. Food is, it says clearly that you give for Jews and non-Jews the same. So I think for us that we're like a food only, I would say we probably, according to Halakhah, there's even Kabbalistic sources that Jews and non-Jews should be treated the same. In my way of like positioning ourselves as an organization, I say that we happen to be kosher, meaning to say because the amount of non-Jews we actually feed is just makes it feel like we just happen to, like the food is, we actually have a hechsher. The OU certifies us, but it's not. It's not. You wouldn't know that by looking at our line. I wouldn't say every moment it looks that way, but there's sometimes you could come on our line and you would see that. Yes, and there is that sort of struggle, and we actually had that in the beginning of COVID. I actually had that dilemma. I came to a real stress point where I actually called up the OU and I said, "There's so much government." Protein, that's chicken, meat, pork, and whatever, that we cannot get access to because it's not kosher, but it's available. We have so many non-Jews on our line. Can we, and I asked this the OU, America had, because of the trade wars, there was just so much pork out there that the Trump administration had to buy out from red state farmers so they shouldn't be upset on the China counter tariffs. So there was so much of that available in March, April, May, that we were looking at what's available for us if only we were not kosher. And it was just, and on the other hand, here we're buying for hundreds of thousands of dollars a month chicken from KJ Poultry, to get, best texture chicken and whatever. And so we were struggling with it. We kind of, I asked my board, I asked the OU. It was a real challenge because, yes, there were a lot of people out there. Now, on the other hand, I do try to do a lot of things that are kosher neutral, meaning to say tilapia fish is an item that probably does not have a kosher premium. Eggs is a perfect protein that doesn't have, you could buy eggs without a hechsher. So there are things that, so we definitely try to focus on that, but I must tell you that the hottest item in a soup kitchen or a food pantry is chicken. Next to that comes grape juice. You know what I mean? Like the basic Shabbos foods are the items that people come and care for. So it's hard to deal, like to not have chicken when that's really what people would care for the most. That's like the biggest prize. So it's definitely a struggle, like Jessica mentioned, where you're buying expensive chicken that has a premium for it been made kosher, and then giving it out to just anybody online. There is a dilemma there.
So the last question I'm going to ask, and then we'll open it up to questions.
Can you just ask a question?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Rabbi Rappoport, a question. Your hours. I noticed that you're open all the time. Do people come in the middle of the night to, either pick up an order for food or to get a meal?
Yeah, so we're like 6-7 weeks into this. So what happened is we were open the regular 5 to 7 hours at each of our locations before COVID, and then we just added an hour before, an hour after, an hour before, until the day and the night just met each other. It became 24 hours. So obviously the last 5-6 hours were kind of iffy. So what we found is the 3 to 5 a.m. is iffy, is only a trickle. The rest, by now, we almost do more at night than by day for many reasons. But one of them is because we went from having, like, let's say 100 people coming for groceries a day to families, right, to 500 families every day at each of our sites. So in the beginning, when everything was on lockdown, it was easy to do that because we didn't bother anybody else. We didn't bother our neighbors, the big lines around the corner. But as people started opening up again, it was a burden on the neighborhoods, on the blocks, on wherever we operated. So part of being open 24 hours was for us staggering it out. So it's not just that one big line a few hours in the middle of the day that's creating a big chaos. And what we noticed is that after the neighboring stores, because we're storefronts, so after the neighboring stores close down, it is almost like easier for us to operate because they don't get upset on the commotion it creates. So we actually stack more appointments in the middle of the night than in the middle of the day, just for that reason. Like, and what we found also is that some of the people who are we have in each of our locations between 10 and 15,000 families trying to make an appointment, and we could only do about 2,500 appointments a week. So kind of having less desired times gives a little bit an open for the person who needs it more. Like if you're going to come at 2 a.m., you probably need it. So it has that balance in it. And I must say that, yeah, like I would say from 3 to 5, some people don't show up their appointment. Like it's a little like it doesn't. So for us, there's also like in the evening when it's dark outside, some people, like you mentioned before, like the dignity issues, like people like to come when they're less seen and whatever. So there's a lot of constant juggling and balancing, and it was a whole transition in 9 months to get into those appointments. But the short answer to your question is that yes, people come 24 hours, and most of the night is probably better for them than the day. There might be that 3 to 5 a.m. that maybe is the exception. But for those 2 hours, we're not just going to close, right?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. So where I was going to say before is one of the things that we kind of dream about is a world in which all the food that's produced gets to all the people that need it. And that maybe in an ideal world, your organizations would sort of be unnecessary. And I'm wondering, like, what you've seen over the years through all the different things you all have done. What would it take to kind of get to a world in which people are not hungry? So last night we sort of asked that question to Mazon, and their answer was like more money for SNAP. So is that an answer that like kind of everyone just agrees with, or are there you have different takes on that? And I thought maybe we would start with.
Well, one thing, I mean, yes, of course, more money for SNAP. I know, during COVID in Illinois, they've been giving the maximum amount for SNAP for any recipient. And that's been a huge help for people. The other thing is the high cost of living a Jewish life. And, whose responsibility is it to try to mitigate that in some way, or is that even possible? And sort of restructuring even the value system within Judaism, where there is just so much, covet given to those who have a lot of money to give. And people that don't and have to actually be in a role of taking just feel so ashamed. And that, division is, very, is very unfair and very unjust. And it would be nice if, the Jewish federations or those with, just huge endowments and a lot of funds would, think about, investing in helping people that don't have as much to be able to live a halachic life. And, pay for day school, or at least, create some subvention for day school, and, be able to intervene in terms of how expensive kosher food is. So the ARC would love to not exist. We always talk about, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could do that, if that would happen in our lifetime? It would be such a miracle, and we'd all gladly, walk away. Unfortunately, I don't think that's really true, but I do think that the Jewish community at large could step up and make life easier for people who want to live Jewish lives.
Thank you. Jessica, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, in addition to those comments, and certainly to the piece about SNAP, the importance of ensuring that people make a livable wage, and there's. I'm married to someone who fancies himself an economist, who admittedly is against mandatory increases in minimum wage. But nonetheless, the fact that we pay people, both at nonprofits, primarily, frankly, nonprofits that are serving the very people who are most vulnerable, that we don't. Met Council actually, under David Greenfield, made a real effort to increase, and everybody at Met Council makes a New York City livable wage as defined by, I think, the City Council passed standards around this. It is still a far cry from anything that Dr. Haas, you're speaking about. I mean, it's still a very it's a de minimis number, frankly, but at least making those kind of commitments, and to the extent anybody is comfortable to advocate for that, but also to think about the people you engage with in your lives, whether as employers or, both, like the services you pay for, are people being paid and compensated fairly. And obviously that is a burden for all of us at all stages. But I do think, of the chain, so to speak. But I do think that really thinking about how we compensate people, and therefore their ability to pay for the services that we ourselves utilize and need is probably the way we see ourselves out of this.
Thank you. Rabbi Rappoport.
So I guess it's a social engineering question. So again, I'm not into it. I'm not, politically speaking, I would say I'm in favor of a universal income. So, if you when you talk about food insecurity and what would it take, it's basically the haves and the haves-not. So it's how to. I just feel that the country that could send people to the moon has enough money to give everybody a universal income. It's just a priority. If to use the word fancy again, if we could fancy ourselves by sending people to the moon, we could fancy ourselves by saying no one goes to sleep hungry, right? It all depends what your desires are, what you think you can be proud of, or what makes you full at night when you're on your couch, right? So kind of saying that we're a country where we figured out no one is going to go to sleep without food. If that makes you as proud of sending a person to the moon, you'll find the money for it, right? So it really, it's a priorities issue. And we just got to be more open to share. I think a lot of the political discourse and dialogue and everything is all about always okay, so again, even if we go back to the checks that were all 600 or 2,000, but it's always to give everybody, because Chas v'shalom, if you're going to say that you give only for those who don't have, then that's not palatable in the current climate. And I just think just more sharing, more, that's where I come down at it. And again, obviously, I believe in trickle-up economics. Give more people at the bottom and the whole economy will turn up. So maybe me and Jessica's husband should have a talk.
I love that.
Don't worry about that.
I said I love trickle-up economics. Fantastic. So I want to open it up for questions, including feel free to follow in Dr. Haas's footsteps and ask questions of each other as well. But also we have some people with us live who should feel free either to pipe in with questions or to put them in the chat, and we'll make sure they get read also.
I have a couple of things. I was trying to look up some stuff as you guys were talking, but I wanted some context. And please correct me if I'm wrong with some of these things. But when you said when did soup kitchens start, at least in this country, and I saw that Al Capone in Chicago in the 1930s started a soup kitchen, which I couldn't believe that. I checked again, so maybe from Chicago you can elaborate. But he did it during the Depression, and it kept going. So that was curious to see that. I was also wandering in the world, and I saw that there was a soup kitchen in London back in 1854 to Jews that were escaping pogroms and had nothing to go to. And so I guess they've been around probably longer than that. And then just some other things. I happen to live in Miami, and there's a lot of food distributions. And Miami is a car culture here. And I'm not making any kind of judgments, but because you were saying some people walk up, you drive by, these lines are so long, and you see Mercedes and BMWs and not many older cars. So it's like, I know you don't check somebody's in line, I'm guessing they're needing it. But to me, it's incredible that how long these lines are with not walking up. People are just driving in, their trunks are open, and they're just getting this food, which seems incredible to me. Also, I can't tell you how many times I go to a grocery store. I'm seeing them just throwing out all this fruit that looks a little bit blemished, or bread, or things like that. And I'm just wondering if there's any sort of collaboration, because it's just, you see all the food in the dumpster, and that could go to someplace better than that. And it would seem to me. And then you can see Seinfeld a million different times, but there was a scene, the episode with a sponge, and they're in a restaurant, and I think George's date worked in the soup kitchen. And then Jerry Seinfeld says, they serve more than soup? Don't they get the... And it's, but hearing it, and who knew? But hearing you saying that all the different things that you do. But I was fascinated in doing some research that soup is a staple. And Jerry's comment was, you mean they eat soup so early in the morning, and don't they get tired and want something else? So it's nice to hear that you're doing other things with that. So I just wanted to just interject, that, and I'll just...
A bunch of different questions all put together, but Rabbi Rappoport, it sounds like you have what to respond.
Yeah, I have for three of the comments. So with the nice cars, I'll just say I have previous donors on our lines. I mean, there are people who probably have their names on buildings in Israel who came to our lines now. Like maybe they were sponsors in the past, but think of a person that kind of goes from deal to deal. The last deal they had was a year or two ago. They can't get any unemployment, or they maxed out their unemployment like 2 years ago because the guy is like a 65-year-old, can't find a new job, was laid off or whatever, like the situations. They own their own house, eligible for very little of the government programs or none, and find themselves with COVID and no food to eat and trying to save their house if there is still a mortgage or whatever. So any little bit of food, they end up coming with their fancy car, and they still have my cell phone from when they came last time when they married off and came with the kala a night before and the wedding and volunteered the whole night and sponsored the whole day. And now they're coming and I literally had a mother say, I'm on your line. I can't take it. Can you please help me? Like she was like just embarrassed, like waiting on the line. I said, just go home. And I just sent someone over with the food. I felt so bad. So that's one thing with when you see some of these fancy cars, these people might have had a good life just a few months ago and they still have their fancy car. So that's one thing. About food rescue, we could make a whole shiur on food rescue. I'm very broken about it. That said, that since in the last 6 weeks, we got between 8 and 9 tractor trailer loads from Menashevet's Kedem of food rescue, of things that are kind of like short, like right at the end of the day, like probably they were December 31st, and we were trying to make use of it. But let's think of a head of lettuce. A head of lettuce is a food that when you see it in the ground, the farmer, when it chops off the head from the floor, probably 50% stays on the ground. When they put it into the box, they take off a few pieces and they put it into the box. The person unpacking it in the fruit store takes a few pieces off and puts it on the shelf. You come home, you take a few pieces off and start washing it. So a lot of food by design is way more about distribution than the actual food essence. Having available stomachs and having ready to eat food and getting that puzzle and getting the maze correctly and the flow of it correctly is so much more. So a lot of food by design, God created it with waste. There is by design waste in it. The fact that the worst food is the shelf-stable food for yourself, right? The food that goes bad is the healthiest for you. So there's another I'm going to give too much of my thoughts away here, but the rich will always get the first cut, and then we'll take the junk, the leftovers, and give that to the poor. Why? If we're going to care about throwing away food, we need to change the nature of waste, but not saying, oh, we're going to rescue all the fancy restaurants' leftovers and give it to the poor the next day. I just see something very wrong about it. I also don't see it economically viable. We sometimes see food rescues, and there are different organizations, pop-up organizations that happen, that they end up spending more on gasoline to save something that's not worth the gasoline that it's spending. And besides what it does for the environment, it just doesn't add up for the economics of it. Some food belongs in the garbage by default. And saying that every piece of garbage, we could have given it to a poor, it's just a bad idea. Why give the poor garbage? You care for the poor? I mean, you made a bar mitzvah and you have leftovers. Why didn't you think of the poor before the bar mitzvah and give an extra check to the poor and don't order so much? So the idea is, if I have leftover from my bar mitzvah, better than the garbage is the poor. No, the poor are not your better than the garbage. I think these are the three. By the way, yeah, you also mentioned the soup, something about Seinfeld. Sorry, I don't watch Seinfeld, but I did end up watching a Saturday night clip when we opened our Queens facility. There was actually a Saturday night live joke on this kosher place that is opening more soup kitchens, and some sort of face the guy made with the soup. I still don't understand the joke, but something something about like soup kitchen soup, and he had like a piece of like whatever. So something with the soup and the soup kitchen, yeah. And just so you know, you could add to your list of. We actually opened the Wikipedia entry for soup kitchen about 10 years ago. So you could add to the list of Jews who opened whatever. There was no entry on Wikipedia until 10 years when we decided, hey, what is that? Now you'll see it's a nicely edited down, fancy piece over there. But we were the ones that.
That's a great fun fact. Thanks. So I'm wondering if there's any other questions. I'm sure some of our other panelists also have thoughts on things that both Steve said, but then also that Rabbi Rappoport responded. That response was full of interesting and probably mildly controversial nuggets. But I'm wondering if other people have some questions to add into the hopper before we keep going. There was Maria, I saw, had actually a question for Rabbi Rappoport, though. She asked about how Masbia was able to scale up to meet needs, but maybe we'll open that up to everyone and say, like, how was everyone able to scale up to meet needs? Meaning all of you spoke about the needs rising, but not actually about where the money came from to do that or how that actually worked. So maybe let's open that question up more broadly, and maybe we'll kick it over to Jessica.
Sure. I mean, I could have also commented on Steve's points, but listening to Rabbi Rappoport is a joy. So I'm glad he took that. Met Council, I mean, we in 2019 calendar year distributed 5 million pounds of food through New York City, and in this last calendar year, we distributed more than 3 times that much food. So well over 15 million pounds. We're actually still doing the final calculations. Unfortunately, we've had some people out with COVID slowing us down on that. But we are, we've absolutely exceeded 15 million pounds. So really very, very significant. Like Masbia, we had to dramatically scale our hours. We are not working through the night, but we do open our warehouse now at 6 a.m., 6 days a week, and really are just everyone on our team has so significantly stepped up to help support this. And it's been, I'm sure you can all imagine the uncertainty, the concerns, the virus, concerns for our friends and family, et cetera. But everyone has really been amazing to allow us to do this. And then, of course, there's the funds. New York City Council back in April announced a $25 million infusion to the Emergency Food Network. Much of it was designed to go directly to programs on the ground, but Met Council was one of the 6 organizations that was selected to help administer and coordinate that effort. And so we were a very significant recipient of those funds. Again, much of it was passed through to other organizations, but it also allowed us to be able to scale and do what was needed. And one of the things, it's probably a bit trite, but that I really feel very proud of is over particularly the last 10 months, we had just an inordinate amount of requests for help, both from individuals, because we do operate pantries ourselves, as well as are known in the community for all of the other social service work we do. But everywhere from mosques to churches to other Jewish organizations, synagogues, et cetera. And really that in the year 2020, we did not have to say no to a single request. And so that was really, really incredible. Obviously, we would love to have been able to do even more and to be able to be even more generous. But it really meant that we could show up for people. And if we're showing up for other organizations, then they're showing up for the community, and they're the ones, on the front line. So it's really, really been incredible. We are very concerned about what happens now. A lot of that funding did end with the calendar year. I'm sure we're all feeling COVID fatigue in our lives. Donors have also been experiencing COVID fatigue, and so we're very concerned about what this means come basically now. But it is it's been really a great blessing and pleasure to be a part of this work these last few months, last several years, but over these last difficult months.
Thank you. I wanted to share that question also with Dr. Haas, because you mentioned that the ARC doesn't take money from the government. So when Met Council needed to scale up their operations, that's where a lot of their funds came from. So how did the ARC manage, and where did your capabilities come from?
Yeah, well, the JUF really stepped up. Our agency was the only.
JUF is the Chicago Federation.
Oh, yeah, right. JUF, Jewish United Fund, and it's the Chicago area Jewish Federation. Thank you. They were very, very generous with us. We're the only food pantry among their agencies. So they knew that was something that the community really needed. So they were very, very generous with financial assistance as well. Also, the community really donated a great deal of money. We found this during the recession of 2008 and 2009 as well, that donors who, may have usually given to the, ballet or the zoo, couldn't give as much, but what they chose to give were essential services. And that was really beneficial. So that really helped us tremendously. One thing that I wanted to ask of the other two other agencies is whether you get wholesale food, whether you're able to do that, and how you were able to develop relationships with purveyors to give you wholesale prices, and was it totally based on you just buying so much that they were willing to do that? How do you maintain those relationships, or, identify the resources?
Why don't we start with Rabbi Rappoport, given that you spoke about getting whole trucks from Manischewitz?
Yeah, so I want to go back to the original question, and I'll come back to this. The original question is how we scaled up. So I came up with a concept a little while ago. I didn't make it up after this question. When you go to store, and there is that little pony, and you put in a quarter and it sings Old MacDonald. You put a kid up and it kind of shakes for 2 minutes. That sort of quarter fed the kiddie ride. Masbia is very much a grassroots charity that is like quarter fed by its donors to do what it does. So what you see the guy that I'm the pony, so to speak. The people put in the quarters, they really make it happen. I would say that in the first days, in the beginning of COVID, those who follow the Hebrew calendar, it was right after Purim through Pesach, right? So we saw an enormous increase of donations coming in, just grassroots donations, plain people going on our website. We were fortunate enough that the New York Times featured us already in March as part of the New York City's response. I got really scared if that's the best they got. Is kind of like, but kind of. So we were able to get a lot of private donors right at the beginning. That's what we needed most. And then as months got in, more of the government additional sources started coming to us. That was more to May and June, helped us kind of keep on what we have done. But the initial spark, the initial mobilization and going so much more was very much like donor driven. Like we saw that there's an appetite by our donors, and we kind of like scaled up. Obviously, like Jessica said, there's like the staff has to come along with you. You can't just and at great risk. I would say we actually announced that we're going to do all our operations outdoors all the time. Like we were a day before New York City even announced that there's no more in-house restaurants. So a lot of it has to do because I followed a lot of the Israeli news, so I saw what was happening there. So I was able to like adapt a little ahead. So we are operating on the sidewalk in front of our facilities since then. We never went in back. I think most of our staff never caught COVID. We operated and saw so many people, and we were just operating in the outdoors and obviously with other safety measures. But that's that. Now to the issue the doctor asked of getting prices. It's really an art. So it's an art also again of supply and demand. So what happens when Menashevitz calls you that they have a trailer load of matzah that is expiring in 4 days, right? So obviously, if you can give it out to people before expiration date is the most dignified way, and you tell them, I'm not going to take it. I can't take it till 10 days. They say, we need it out of the warehouse today. You need to be able to have that capacity. So we, like I said before, we actually got in kind, when you say food rescue, things that we did not pay for in the last 6 weeks, something like 8 tractor trailers worth of food from Menashevitz Keiko alone. But even on the even on what we buy from them, what we pay, and we buy from other places, it is always a challenge, and it is always like you have to. To me, it's a game of what are we getting from government? What are we? It's like a puzzle. It's like a and I juggle things and it's a constant art and kind of who are the vendors who are going to give you the best price if it's COD versus who are the best vendors who are going to give you 90 days to pay, depending on what your cash or hand flow is. There's just so many variables and that's the trick. But at the end of the day, I think what you touched on it is it's just the volume that, and we also kind of stick to there's probably those 50 to 70 items that we care for. It's not like we want to fill a gazillion of different types of food. It's the first 50 food pantry items, from rice, pasta, flour, oil, basic, protein, starch, and vegetables that are the very basic that we care for. And we slowly learn who are the people who have those commodities at the best levels, or the best prices.
So this conversation could probably keep going for a very long time because the work you all do is extremely interesting and different from each other, and we have so much to learn from you. Unfortunately, we are over time, and we should probably call it a night, but I did want to thank our panelists so very much for joining us. I want to thank everyone who came and who's watching on Facebook and who's watching here. It's been a really tough day for America, and to spend an hour talking about chesed and about people who do amazing work and the donors who support that. And we talked about federations, which represent entire massive Jewish communities worth of giving, doing really, really good stuff with that communal funds. And of course, we have the challenge from Dr. Haas that even, there's so much more that can be done. But to take a moment to thank you, the three of you and your organizations, your agencies, for the incredible work that you do on behalf of the Jewish people and facing the whole world. And really, we're so honored to have you joining us here at Drisha as part of our Wintersman. And we're just as Jews, we're so grateful that you're doing the work that you're doing. So thank you all so much.